Hi everyone. I'll begin with an image description of myself, as that is another important accessibility feature for the disability community at large. Just another illustration of how accommodations come in many shapes and forms depending on your specific disability. I'm a young college-going male in his 20s of Indian American origin and with brown skin. I use the he pronoun. I have short black hair and am wearing a blue cap with the word Cal on the front. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt with the word Berkeley on it. I am sitting at my desk in front of my laptop in my room. Behind me on the wall and on my closet door are various college banners and posters with words like University of California, Berkeley, Cal, Golden Bears, or catchy phrases like "This is bear territory" or "Bear Den. Enter at your own risk." I'll start with the best possible introduction one can ask for. A shout-out from the President of the U.S., President Barack Obama, on the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act on Instagram. So here goes.
I'm Srinivasan. I'm a student at UC in psychology.
UC Berkeley campus.
I am a minimally speaking autistic. I use augmentative alternative communication.
Oof, what a mouthful.
Activism can manifest in many ways, in my case, one typed sentence at a time. I teach a semester-long class on autism. It is a chance to influence how students come to regard and interact with autistics for the rest of their lives.
A multicultural class photo.
At no point did anyone here say, "No, you can't do this because you are too disabled."
Info table and banner.
Accessibility is the acceptance of alternative paths and workarounds, where the worth of an individual is not judged by their perceived ability. Dare I dream of such a world? President Obama's Instagram introduction reads, "As we continue to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I thought I would share the stories of 3 young activists leading the charge in disability rights movement. Storm, Hari and Noah are working in their communities, at their schools, places of work, neighborhoods, to advocate for a future that is more inclusive and accessible for all people. As a student studying psychology at UC Berkeley, Hari educates his peers by sharing his experience as a minimally speaking autistic while teaching a semester-long class on autism." This was my reaction. Before we continue, wanted to touch on the agenda. The first part will more or less be about what I do and what does my disability looks like, etc. Then we will move on to a few audience participation activities where we kind of brainstorm ideas like activism, equality, disability justice, harnessing your core passions, etc. We will have Q&A. If there is time after that. I do want to add on a few more things about what I do and in a little more detail. Why? Because it shows the potential and possibilities. Disabled or not, we all can find ways to be a contributing and productive member of society. I've written over 40 articles for the Daily Californian, which have included 36 interviews, many of them in person. People usually get over their initial surprise of being interviewed via a text-to-speech app. I have to get over my social anxiety for each interview, which has been challenging, though they have turned out fine in the end. I walk away in absolute awe after some of these interviews. One of my best interview experiences was with the legendary disability rights activist Judy Heumann. I read all the 460 pages plus of oral history archives in our library to prep for that interview, as I did not want to put my foot in my mouth. She asked questions right back, so it was good I prepared. At 5,635 words, my article showing the spectrum of autism at UC Berkeley was the longest article ever published by the Daily Cal to date. The Daily Cal art department did a clever cover illustration of the 7 autistics featured in the article. We were all pretty thrilled with the illustration, We felt like superheroes. My minor is Disability Studies, and on the first day of Professor Victor Pineda's Universal Design class, I knew I had to write about what employment looked like for people with disabilities. So I interviewed disabled faculty and staff to find out. Even as I write these articles, I find that each one is also a learning experience for me. When I applied to the Daily Cal, I was not even sure I would get in. And a very nervous me went in for my first edit session, which is the picture far left above. The other perks of Daily Cal that I love is the socialization opportunities it provides. I started off with a column on autism, but have written about many things since, disability and non-disability. The next slide shows a video clip taken by the multimedia department of the Daily Cal, where we talk about our columns. I will be joining the Daily Cal as an opinion columnist. Thoughts flow out of my head one slow letter at a time onto the keyboard. To question and demand change has been an unquestioned prerogative of Cal students, and I look forward to joining the ranks of the Daily Cal. I may be nonverbal, but my voice too can be heard through the medium of the typed word. The theme of my column is, the person inside. Inside us differently abled folks, lies an intelligent person, a person who has empathy, a person who also wants to contribute to society, and a person who is worth knowing. All that is needed is a little bit of patience, tolerance, and inclusion. I want to dispel myths about disability, inform and question, in order to bring about shifts in attitude amongst the student population. The first step in bringing about change is awareness, and that is what I hope to do. The RadMed Disability Lab is a hidden gem at UC Berkeley. I found out about the lab quite by accident. I had approached Professor Nakamura, who heads the Disability Studies Department, for some comments for an article I was writing. She has suggested I come visit the lab and meet the team. I was so intrigued. I now had team propaganda at the lab. This lab is possibly the only makerspace lab in the UC system. This amazing lab hacks low-cost crib solutions. The solutions are primarily targeted at physical disabilities, but a deep dive into other disabilities helps me expand my knowledge on the issues. DCAL, or Democratic Education at Cal, are faculty-sponsored, student-taught courses. This will be my fourth semester as lead instructor of this one-unit weekly autism spectrum disorder DCAL. The title of the course itself has evolved to reflect the ratio of the exploding rates of autism diagnosis. Back when I was diagnosed at age 3, the ratio used to be 1 in 110. When I started with this class, the course title was 1 in 68. It then became 1 in 59, and in fall it will be 1 in 54 autism spectrum disorder. The class is quite popular. Enrollment was under 20 in my first semester, was increased to 25, then 30, and will now have an enrollment of 40 this fall semester. I was quite sad at having to turn students down the last few semesters as we had reached enrollment cap. Teaching this class has truly been an amazing experience for me. I get to drive most of the class content, which I love. I wanted to get involved in this DCAL as I was very curious as to what my neurotypical peers were learning about autism. I soon realized that a lot more needed to be covered and said about introducing other topics which are necessary, relevant, and more reflective of the needs of the day. For instance, there was no mention of adults. Autism does not magically disappear in adulthood. So we have panels with adults on the spectrum so they can discuss their lived experiences with the class. I keep tweaking materials and readings each semester and ways to get the students more engaged with autism. Of course, the syllabus has to go through the approval process each semester. I want each student coming into the class to rethink the way they will think about and interact with autistics and become a future ally to the community. I want it to be a practical class where students remember what they are exposed to rather than treat it as a subject that is forgotten after the finals are over. Incidentally, there are no exams or tests, and it's all participation-based. I introduced other aspects of autism such as therapies, treatments, technology, stigma, comorbidities, housing, family issues, technology, research, recreation and employment. There are prepared lecture slides for some topics and guest speakers for others. We do cover some of the history, DSM criteria in the first class to give context. When we get international students in the class, I encourage them to talk about autism in their country so that the class can learn from one another. We discuss intersectionalities and have group projects on representation of autism in the media. We also discuss careers that my neurotypical peers could pursue to get involved in this field. Did you know there are literally a zillion ways to get involved in practically every area you can think of? In fact, for the number of things I want to cover, the 12 to 13 weeks of semester are barely enough. I have fellow student instructors to help teach the class, as there are some things which are practically very hard for me to do. It's the ease at which they are able to greet students who walk into the classroom, produce light social chatter on the spot, fill in awkward gaps quickly, troubleshoot any queries for our guest speakers and panels, and come up with interesting icebreaker activities, and of course help teach. Having at least one talking student instructor really helps, so I have had from 1 to 3 fellow student instructors. I was a little nervous the one semester with only one fellow student teacher, in case she fell sick. So I had polled other students in the class if they would be willing to pitch in and help for those days. My fellow student teachers over the last 3 semesters have been amazing and helpful, and I have enjoyed working with each of them. That's what accommodations look like in a practical sense. We all benefit from the experience of working together. I found out about the Spectrum at CalStudent.org during my 2nd or 3rd semester when I came upon their booth in our main Sproul Plaza and joined the Awareness Committee and later its board. The org comprises of both autistics and neurotypical students. We work on campus awareness, community outreach, community volunteering, as well as supporting autistics at Cal. The org has grown by leaps and bounds since I have been at Cal, with increasing numbers of autistics in leadership roles. I am its first non-speaking autistic president, which really says a lot about the diversity of the organization. Last year was another first, with Spectrum's first Black autistic president. We have made a lot of plans for the coming year, though the coronavirus situation has meant that we have had to rethink many of our traditional activities. I guess now that Spectrum made an appearance on President Obama's Instagram, we will attract more volunteers. We are looking forward to working with everyone, both autistics and allies. I also like that I get to share knowledge. I have presented at conferences on topics like standard of care for mental health in autism, the search for restorative sleep in autism, the reimagining possibilities for non-speakers and minimal speakers at UCSF literally happened a week before the pandemic lockdown began earlier this year. I even got to be co-moderator for a webinar featuring Judy Human recently. Imagine a non-speaker as a moderator. That's progress. I love all my classes here at Cal. When you love learning, grades kind of follow along. I'm in the Sichi Honor Society. In the meantime, I am on the learning path as a research assistant at various psychology labs as I hope to go to grad school. The application process looked very complicated, so I had no idea how to even start the process. So I basically just emailed Professor Steve Henshaw, who turned out to be very open to figuring out how I could contribute to his lab. In an interview with the UC Berkeley Library later that year, Professor Hinshaw praised my research skills, which gives me encouragement that I can succeed in this arena. From Hinshaw Lab I moved to Professor Harvey's Golden Bear Mood and Sleep Research Clinic. I continue to learn and grow. Can the quest for knowledge ever end? On a lighter note, I am an avid poet and philosopher. I have written over 200+ poems and a few short stories. I have also written in other languages including my family's native Tamil. I even tried my hand at writing poetry in Spanish when I was learning Spanish in high school. I have won around 44 awards for many of these. Philosophy also fascinates me and I've written on the subject. I have plans for future fiction and non-fiction books. One of my dreams is to be able to recite my poetry in my own voice with clarity and the right intonation. I find that the text-to-speech app never comes even close to a human voice in reciting the flows of poetry. I'm still learning to talk. I wanted to share this really short 8-line poem with you. Here goes.
Poetry is like a river. It flows gently. It washes muddy. It crashes over boulders in its path. It soars to a trickle. It pauses and turns the bend. In the end, it merges into the depths of the sea.
I find that much of the current generation of non-disabled students here are blissfully unaware that Berkeley had been a powerhouse in the disability rights movement in the past. Neither are they aware of many of the issues faced by the disabled community in the present. A disability studies professor had commented that I had brought some attention back to disability-related issues at Berkeley. I was very happy to hear that. Going forward, we will need the support of our non-disabled peers for any change to occur. But how can they be involved if they are not even aware of what is going on to begin with? The issue goes beyond just mere awareness and inclusion. Inclusion is being in the presence of my non-disabled peers, existing in the same environment, so to speak. For instance, being in the corner of the same playground as my typical peers at recess and lunchtime was a token nod to inclusion during much of my special education years. I was somehow supposed to absorb neurotypical skills through magical osmosis in that noisy environment of kids screaming and running around. I may have been in the same environment as my non-disabled peers, but I was an observer, the other group. I was not accepted and I did not belong. Over the years, I've had high school volunteers come and spend time with me to do activities. These are nice, but these are standalone activities. You were never involved in getting to know them outside of those activities. So beyond inclusion, what we actually need is belongingness. We need not only be in the same space and interacting with our non-disabled peers, but we need to be accepted as members whose lives have equal worth. We need to feel we belong to that group, a sense of camaraderie. Inclusion is just the first step. Belongingness is, I think, what we all yearn for at the end of the day when it comes to society. Will we get there? I sure hope our actions and purpose take us there. I like to think of myself as possibility, Hari as possibility, that I can do much with my own life and help others too along the way. Unless you see possibility, there can be no opportunity. In fact, I invite you all to think of disability as possibility and thus open opportunities for us all. Sometimes part of what influences our life philosophy can come from the most unexpected of sources. In my elementary years I had been obsessed with watching the TV show, Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas would always strive to be an useful engine. The word, useful, especially caught my imagination. I wanted to be really useful too. Later in my high school years, I got to hear more about our Hindu and other Eastern philosophy. The concepts of love all, serve all, help ever, hurt never, deeply influence my thinking. I've heard the word activist applied to me a few times this year, and it still catches me by surprise every time. I don't think I really set out with a conscious intention of becoming an activist as such. The idea of an activist for me had always been someone marching at the head of a crowd with a banner and megaphone in hand. But I am glad that the small steps I take is adding to the flow of the upcoming tsunami of change. Let's get down to what my type of autism looks like. This part is the 90% of my daily reality. I have oral motor apraxia, which is kind of a really broad term. What this means is both my speech and my motor ability is affected in so many ways. Let's start with speech. I am a non-speaking autistic, or a minimally speaking autistic. I can say a few basic sentences, but beyond that I need to use yeah-see while I am learning to talk. Yeah-see or augmentative alternative communication refers to devices or technology that helps you communicate. In my case it's text-to-speech software. While this all sounds like a grand solution, it can be a bit jarring as there are only like 2 American male voices, the most popular one being Ryan voice. So all non-speakers sound alike, which can be a muddle when 2 non-speakers are in the same class using the same Ryan voice. We lose our unique personality to this guy called Ryan. So much as I am reliant on Ryan's voice, I don't particularly like his voice either. Many people also confuse the lack of speech with the lack of cognitive ability. But it is not so. There is a disconnect between the thoughts in my brain and the ability of my motor muscles to carry out those instructions. I can think of something, but often unable to sequence the words out of my mouth. The other person in the meantime is staring at me, waiting for me to output some words, so there is great pressure to perform the act of talking, almost like a spotlight effect. Now the motor part. Again, there is a disconnect between the instruction given by the brain and the muscle doing the actual motor task. The result is poor fine motor skills. I have almost no handwriting skills, which can present challenges in doing the penmanship required for math and science. Poor fine motor skills can also really affect your daily living skills, starting from buttoning your shirt. And though I use yeah-see to communicate, technology is still difficult to use and manipulate when you have fine motor challenges. And I am a slow typer, so communication can be slow. I sure am hoping for sort of technology breakthrough, a kind of non-invasive wearable cap that I can put on and which would just pick up on my brain waves to communicate. I also have a poor body schema or body mapping. What this means is that my brain is now always aware of my entire body in space and time, which can be very disconcerting. I have also written an article about this in the Daily Cal. Sensory dysregulation, or the inability to process the environmental input efficiently, is often what is behind all the atypical body mannerisms called stimming. Obsessive-compulsive and repetitive behaviors is common amongst many autistics, and at times the intensity of these behaviors can really interfere and distract from being productive in your daily living life. I will again refer you to my Daily Cal articles on both of these for more detail. I also have a dual diagnosis of ADHD. So the combination of all these can make for pretty crazy body movements. I am never working, almost just running and fidgeting. Ironically, the ADHD need for novelty often clashes with the need for sameness in autism. With all this going on, do you wonder I have social anxiety and mood regulation issues? My body is not easy to manage. It's like driving a car with a loose steering wheel in a world full of unexpected societal potholes. It can result in anxiety, frustration, and the sensory meltdowns. Where there are a lot of challenges, there's often considerable lack of inclusion and gatekeeping by not just society in general, but also by the very professionals and educators in the field, whether intentional or not. From gatekeeping, we need to be looking at possibilities in all manner of disabilities so there is inclusion, belonging, and opportunity for all. I want to illustrate this with a rundown of my early years. And yes, I'm gonna use a poem to do just that. I remember at 1. A bright baby was I, bouncy as can be. Learning to walk and talk just as babies do. Cooing and laughing, intent upon fun. The future so bright, and the grass so green. I was the social guy, the life of the party at my first birthday. I remember at 3. The world torn asunder around me. Helplessly hearing a diagnosis that perplexed me. What is this autism they all talk about? The future turned dull and the grass turned brown. Mine is a case of regressive autism. I had met all of my milestones, but regressed between 18 months to 2 years. I lost the phrases I was speaking, and started spinning the wheels of my tricycle instead. I had no eye contact and stopped responding to my name. I was diagnosed at age 3, with autism and ADHD. I remember at 6. A parade of therapies surrounding me. Understanding not the person that was me. Tossed between teachers both kind and mean. The future so bleak and the skies so gray. My elementary education was dismal at best. I was tossed between special education classrooms as I was the behavior kid. I learned that if I tantrum, I would get to go home, so my tantrums became earlier in the day as the year progressed. I was not making progress in the traditional therapies for autism as they were not really accounting for my challenges and comorbidities. The only thing I did enjoy were the weekly playgroups that were run by a therapist. I remember at 9. Why does he act so? The general cry. This body does not reflect my mind, my silent reply. Repeating lessons that bored me to death. The future so dark and the day turned at night. I was bored to death with the same preschool type of lessons as it was assumed I could not learn. I had no way to communicate either. I was quite frustrated and depressed. By middle school I was sent off to a non-public school. I would have stayed there till age 22, then gone to an adult day program for the rest of my life. I remember at 12. Happiness arose as my words were typed. Potential of this bright mind now sets in. Wonder at the difference of the body and mind. The future so bright and the skies now blue. This was a pivotal point in my life, as this is when I learned communication via a YAC device. Communication meant expression of my potential. I hoped that access to mainstream education was still possible. I was like a kid outside the candy store of education looking longingly in. My school district was, however, still very reluctant to mainstream me. I guess perceptions built over the years are hard to change overnight. I remember at 15. Education finally, public charter school way. Biology and calculus, sprinkles of Shakespeare. Carnegie Hall beckoned me. Luckily workaround to education came via a public charter school in 8th grade. When the charter school did a full psych ed assessment, they found I was in 12th grade for math and college level for English. Turned out I was pretty smart after all. I dived right in. In high school I was a straight A student, a member of the National Honor Society, and graduated as valedictorian. I also did a few interesting internships, won a bunch of awards, including a national gold medal which I got at Carnegie Hall, got published in an anthology with a foreword by Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel. While my mind and my dreams were on one track, my body with its autism challenges continued on its unpredictable track. Hugh. I threw a lot of info at you today. Thank you for your patience. Audience activity number 1. What does activism look like for you? What are traditional and non-traditional ways of activism for the disabled and their allies? How might we go about doing this? Audience activity 2. What does equality mean when it comes to disability? What really spoke to me on the subject of equality is this quote from Judy Heumann's memoir. Part of the problem is that we think equality is about treating people the same. It's not. It's about fairness. It's about equity of access. It looks different for someone like me. I also like this other screenshot that a fellow student had taken during a binder she had been listening to. Audience activity number 3. What comes to your mind when you think of disability justice? Part of disability justice is also about who gets left out of the conversation, who is visible and who does not get a seat at the table. When the voices of a group are not heard in society, there is a tendency for society to forget about that group. Out of sight is out of mind for society. It will negatively impact awareness of issues, funding, resource allocation and inclusion. Let's look at examples of who is getting left out of the conversation. The disability community gets left out of the mainstream conversations. We need to make our voices loud so we get to be part of the conversation. Much like in the rest of society, disabled BIPOC or disabled Black, Indigenous and people of color have historically been left out of disability conversations. In addition, disabilities like autism and intellectual disabilities are getting left out of conversations around disabilities. The early disability rights movement does indeed have roots in physical disability. In the meantime, however, the numbers of autism and intellectual disability are fast increasing, and we need to amplify these voices. Within autism, the minimal speakers and non-speakers are left out of the conversation. Non-speakers like me should not be the rarity in the increasing world of college-going autistics. Why are many of my neurotypical peers at college so shocked and awed that I made it to college? Society's image of a college-going autistic and employed autistic is something completely different, and this is because we are not visible to society and left out of the conversations around autism inclusion, whether it is in education, employment, societal inclusion and understanding. A troubling issue is the stigma within autism towards those with greater communication challenges, namely the non-speakers and minimal speakers. I don't think there is such a distinct class system in any other label. The labels of high-functioning and low-functioning, almost like rich person versus poor person, form or ableism. A high-functioning autistic or their family member will always be quick to name-drop the high part of their label as a badge of honor. Just think of the message they are sending about the self-worth of the perceived non-high individual at the other end of the conversation. It is irrational to perpetuate stigma within your community when the community itself is facing stigma from the outside. I have to wonder if educators are unknowingly perpetuating this stigma by putting kids into different buckets early on. This early segregation leads to tremendous gatekeeping and being denied opportunities at every step, be it access to better classrooms, better expectations mainstreaming, and perhaps later to employment. A better term I am hearing these days is high support needs, as then you can focus on what needs to be done to bring about equity of access. However, the fact of the matter is that society forgets that such autistics exist, as they are not included in mainstream society and are in programs that are largely out of sight. We need to amplify and include this population. Distressing and disturbing headlines like these are the very real consequences when certain groups are left out the conversations. Newsworthy only when it reaches a crisis state. What we need is leadership of the most impacted. The disability community as a whole and marginalized populations within the disability community should not be left out of the conversations. There is no justice unless there is justice for all. Audience activity number 4. How might we go about including marginalized groups in the conversation? What are examples of other marginalized groups within the disability community? Any thoughts? I wanted to end with this slide from my Human Happiness class taught by Professor Daker Keltner at UC Berkeley. In his class he advises students to develop a life philosophy based on their core passions. Core passions will lead you to action and big life choices. In fact, in this class, we learned that certain kinds of anger are actually good for society, good to bring about social change. Professor Keltner felt that we students are more aware of issues going on around us these days, but there is a gap in the application of the knowledge. So a first step in bringing out meaningful change would be to incorporate our knowledge into the work that we do every day. I would like to hear your thoughts. How can you, whether disabled or an ally, harness your core passions and strengths to help the disability community and marginalized groups within the disability community? Thank you for your patience.